Welcome to NovoEDTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoED. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoED is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoED. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoED makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEDTalks episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Mel Lepine, who is a global HR executive with over 20 years of experience leading talent, learning, and organizational development across multiple industries. As global head of talent and e-learning, she supports 140,000 plus employees worldwide, transforming onboarding, modernizing learning platforms, and redesigning performance management to drive engagement and growth. She's passionate about building inclusive, future-ready workforces through data-driven and digital innovation. Mel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the NovoEDTalks podcast today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by introducing yourself, your role, and your company a little bit more?
Sure. So as you rightly said, I've worked in talent learning for a long time. We run a somewhat devolved learning organization. So my role has predominantly been about enablement rather than actual delivery of learning. But we work across it's a global real estate company, the largest global real estate company, and essentially supporting the whole workforce to think about how we can, really drive their capability. So I focus predominantly on platforms, vendors, kind of skills architecture, a bit around governance, and starting to do a bit more of that kind of central governance piece, actually, as the year progresses this year.
That's great. And wow, 140,000 plus learners. That's incredible. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about who some of these learners are and what challenges they face?
Absolutely. It is. It's a big workforce that has grown incredibly rapidly. So, a highly diverse workforce. So we have, obviously we're global, multiple different roles across multiple different geographies and people across multiple career stages too, of course. If I think about the different types of roles we've got technicians, obviously salespeople, account managers, brokers. We're operating across facilities management, investment management, advisory services. And so very broad set of individuals that we're supporting.
Yeah.
If I think about the challenges, we have a natural aging workforce, of technicians. So we're looking to kind of manage that. Very rapid skills evolution, as is going on everywhere right now. So, the world is changing. And that breadth of roles that I already talked about. And then the standard challenges that everybody is facing. So technology is evolving, AI is coming in, how big is that impact going to be? How does that enable us? But how does that challenge us? How are we responding to that? And then there's also something about equity of access to learning and development, because we are devolved in our approach. That means that different people have different strategies and have different ways of approaching the needs. So that brings a challenge, and I guess we also have that tension around scale, relevance, economies of scale versus requirement for local relevance and segment specificity. So there's that tension that we're dealing with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes up with some of the bigger global organizations that we talk to, like how do you balance that? I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but I know that can be incredibly challenging while you're trying to scale, but then also keep it relevant to certain communities and groups.
Absolutely. And right now, we are running this kind of devolved function, which means that really the segments are doing their own thing. Where we're trying to get smarter is where there is some level of similarity across those strategic directions. So it's things like leadership development, where they are less needing of that local nuance, are areas that we really can start to build some consistency, to build some, strategic thinking globally about who our leaders are, what we want them to be, how we want them to behave, and how really we're going to drive that differentiation for our organization. So that's how I've started to do that, and will continue to do more over the coming year, is really thinking about where are the synergies, where are the pieces that volume is required, and therefore we're going to get benefit from doing that centrally, and which are the pieces that are truly relevant. So perhaps that's a 70-30, perhaps that's a 60-40 that says some specific roles will need these specificities, and actually centrally I'm not best placed to deliver that, or my team are not, because actually I'm not close enough to that business to know.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. You talked a little bit about some learning development leadership challenges there, and also some of the learners challenges, but what are some of the bigger kind of workforce development challenges in general at a high level that you are looking at and approaching right now?
Well, I think skills, which again, you probably hear from a lot of people, but I think skills is one of the things that we're really thinking about. So, we have always been very role-based. So our career pathways would look a certain, in a fairly vertical way, very linear. And so we're trying to think about, actually, as that battle for talent continues to grow, how is it that we can better have visibility of the skills across our organization, and have a better understanding of what all of those roles really need in terms of skills, so that we can be much more flexible, much more agile in our approach to moving people around the business, but even developing people, kind of giving them that focus on what skills are going to be durable, right? How are we going to make sure that those skills are enabling us for the future? So thinking about some of that learning agility, thinking about adaptability, and kind of building that psychological safety, to name but a few. And I think that is an area that we're really focusing on. And then I think added to that, the global complexity brings with it that cultural challenge. So as we're trying to develop learning for people, how do we make sure that we're addressing language requirements and cultural requirements whilst bringing that kind of consistency of feel to the learning? That's kind of almost a juxtaposition.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that I love that you used, the durable skills kind of phrase. We've started to hear that come up more and more, durable skills or power skills. We've even heard people call them. But, as we're, thinking about skills, and obviously with the need, with what those skill needs are is constantly shifting. What capabilities do you believe will matter most for our future frontline talent? And how are you seeing organizations kind of prepare people for those emerging trends?
Yeah, and I touched on a few of them. I think we've started to talk about IQ, EQ, TQ. And so that kind of real balance of, yeah, I'm really understanding the human element. I'm really understanding what I need to bring as a leader. But that alone won't do the trick. I need to really understand how technology is going to impact. And, currently AI being that real driver, but AI on its own also won't do the trick. So we really need to understand that complete picture. And I think linked to that, then we need people who've got real curiosity, who've got a real willingness to have an open mind and an openness to all of those new pieces, coupled with courage, coupled with the ability to say, I am going to step into this new space and I am going to try and make this work, or not. I am going to fail at this and I'm going to learn from that and then try again and move forward. So I think there's that need for that IQ, EQ, TQ. But then, I mean, some of the more, traditional, I guess, skills remain. So psychological safety, how can they drive trust with their team so their teams can all do that? Fail fast, move forward. How can they make sure that their teams feel confident to step into a new world that is a little bit uncertain? So I think there's certainly something about that. Obviously data, that goes without saying, and we've got some AI that's going to help us to do that now. But then how do you interpret that? How do you put that into practice? How do you really, take your humanness and apply that to that data so that you're really making sense of it? And I think that's another skill that we probably need, is that storytelling and sense making of the world, of the environment, of the job, of the, of the role, whatever that might be. I think a leader's going to need that more and more, because we're going to have more ambiguity. And so we need to be sense makers for people. We need to kind of calm the storm and help people see where we go next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's two things you said there that I really, really loved. The first one being, coupled with courage, right? That's something maybe we don't talk about enough. We're just saying, oh, we gotta try this, we gotta adapt, blah, blah, blah. And we don't really talk about what it takes to do that in a new organization and in a role, and to step outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's really, really great that you brought that up, because I do think that is something that is super important for right now, with everything that we're trying to understand and adapt and learn new skills. And there has to be this willingness to, like you mentioned, try something new and be okay with failing at it. And that does absolutely take courage. And so I think creating an environment where that's, put out there and accepted is so, so important. And then, of course, I love that you added, adding the human element to that storytelling capability, because I think, with AI, we're going to get so much more data, even then we already have access to a lot of data, but we're going to get even more and be able to cut that a bunch of different ways. But, what story are you trying to tell with that? And is that data actually getting at that story? So I really loved your answer there, Mel. Thank you. Switching to thinking about skills gaps a little bit, when you think about skills gaps across different parts of the business, what approaches or methods have you seen work well to kind of identify and address those gaps, especially with frontline leaders?
Yeah, and I guess a few different ways. I think one of the things that we're trying to do in a somewhat regimented way, but it's not always as regimented as we would like, but is thinking about our critical talent pools. So not trying to boil the ocean, not trying to manage all things for all people, but really thinking about, okay, let's start with our critical talent pools and start to think about what skills they might need and how they're performing. So that certainly has been one place that we've started to focus. But I think essentially identifying those gaps is, we're thinking about feedback. So whether that be client feedback or internal feedback, actually, what are we hearing? How are people being given that information and being given guidance about how they're doing? Naturally, some of our KPI gaps will be informing that. So where are we not seeing performance across our business? Where are we not hitting the targets? Why is that? What's the underlying reason for that? That helps shape where we might see some skills gaps. We've got some of your typical areas. So we've got some observational checklists, which are, what we do for some of the more tactical activities that people have to do. We have introduced last year more continuous conversations. So we transformed our performance management approach to make everything that we do more continuous. So we are talking to people about their goals and their development on a much more regular basis. And within that conversation, obviously that drives much more of a feedback loop. So ensuring that people really are hearing from their leader and getting guidance and coaching and support from their leaders. And whilst it's not something we've had a lot of in the last year, we're really using employee engagement feedback. So our last 3 years, a lot of our strategic direction for talent and learning has come from the insights, the key themes that are coming out of that employee engagement survey. So understanding where our people at volume are telling us that there is a need and focusing in on that. Hence, we've done some work on onboarding. Hence, we've done some work on performance management, because they were areas of need. So I think that's how we're identifying some of those gaps. That's how that's coming up. How we're addressing them. I mean, I think there is definitely a shift towards helping people see that you can't plan everything. And so actually helping them understand that sometimes we have to work in ambiguity, and we might have a North Star, but there could be 4 or 5 paths, and we're not entirely always sure which path we're going to take, but we'll have that North Star. So it's giving them something to anchor to whilst they're still, maneuvering, because we're pivoting whilst we're getting to that North Star. So I think that's certainly something we're doing. But also we are thinking about how I talked about psychological safety. How are we giving people a space that is safe to practice in? And I'm not talking about role plays anymore like we used to, but how can we give them some simulations that they can play in so that they can really get a chance to practice in an environment that feels real? How we're using some AI coaching to help people practice those conversations that they might have to have. But with, obviously, because AI driven, they're getting much more personal feedback and they're getting much more objective feedback than you and I having a little practice run in a room. So we're trying to give people the opportunity to, build that experience with psychological safety. And then, of course, we're building out things like skills taxonomies. We're thinking about how can we help shape, so that people can start to address, and we're not quite at the talent marketplace yet, but we are thinking about how can we shift towards that so that we are defining our skills taxonomy, and then people are being able to think about, right, and how do I fit into that taxonomy, and where do I want to go? And so which skills do I need to develop in order to get myself where I want to be? So a few different ways that we're looking at it, I think. But certainly starting to look at the critical roles, thinking about skills and then adjacent skills to help people grow and build, and probably also doing that small scale and building rather than big bang.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I loved what you said about having a North Star, because I think that's really true too. And almost keeping that there's multiple paths to get to that North Star mindset in the like mindset of skills as well, right? Like there might be like, we think these are the skills that you need to really kind of like get to this point. But, as things shift and tap, that might change, So I think that's really, really important for the workforce right now to kind of keep in mind. You talked a lot about how you measure skills gaps and how you're addressing those. On the flip side of that, what indicators or signals do you look for that suggests learning is going, or sorry, what do you look for that suggests that learning is gaining traction, whether through, engagement, retention, feedback, capability growth, any of that?
Yeah. And I think the biggest, most obvious one for us is always word of mouth. So we're being asked. So, we've delivered something and someone else says, oh, I've heard that they're using this program. Tell me a bit more about that. I think that is our natural, obvious indicator that things are, that we're getting some traction. But there's some other more, more tangible results, I guess, which is, if it's on a platform, repeat usage of that platform. So we're seeing people go back in. So as an example, we have created some training around our people leadership pillars. So actually what pieces, if you want to work on this pillar, here's some information that you can do. And being able to see that people are going back into that information multiple times. So that tells us that that is a useful piece of information, because people aren't just going once and dropping it, but they're going back time and again to help either practice that skill or to remind themselves of that information. So I think that repeat usage is definitely a part of it. Depth of engagement. So some of our programs have got, have you ticked the box, or have you done all of the surrounding pieces? So in that People Manager Excellence program I talk about, we have you must complete X number out of X number to get your badge. But actually, for those that have fully completed the whole lot, that demonstrates to us that this is engaging and this is something that people want to be doing. And then I think over time, it's not an immediate, but obviously shifting KPIs. So when we've identified the outcomes, are we seeing that outcome actually play out in the KPIs? Are we seeing more mobility and promotion because people are gathering those skills? I think those are probably the key pieces that we look at.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love how, I think that gives you really good signals, but you're still able to do it high level enough where you are dealing with 140,000 plus the employees, where you can still gain some really great like insights from that and help shape your programs. I think that's really important. When you look across the organization, what types of learning or development solutions have you seen make the biggest impact? And what do you think contributed to that success?
That's a really good question. I think there's one program that stands out for us because it was one that we developed centrally, but in close collaboration with our segment leaders. So it was something that we co-created, I guess, together, which was around, so I talked about people manager excellence, and the piece I was talking about was some kind of on-demand learning. We also have an immersion product that goes alongside that, which is the piece that I'm describing now. And so that was co-created. It's with an external vendor as well as some internal content. It has got simulations embedded within it. So it was enterprise designed, locally owned. So they deliver it now. We helped them design it, but now they're doing it themselves. It's very experiential. There's some social elements to it. And I think why it's been really impactful is it's really relevant to work. It's all the things that we're trying to drive. So we're talking about customer satisfaction. We're talking about employee engagement. We're talking about employee development alongside running the job, doing the BAU. And so it's got some real relevance to them. It's not content, it's practice. And so it's an actual doing experience rather than a listening experience. And there is some level of peer accountability too. So through the program, they're kind of connected to one another and they're working with somebody else, not just on their own. And so there's that kind of accountability piece. So yeah, I think all of those pieces have come together to drive success. And we've really been able to demonstrate reduced attrition in those groups of people that have been through that program. We've been able to show engagement levels are higher for those people that have been through the program. And so, some real impact, but also longevity. It's a program that's launched and stayed and grown through different parts of the organization, which is fantastic.
That's great. And you love to see that when that happens with programs, right? Because I think it speaks volumes to how relevant they are, that they're able to kind of grow and adapt as, you have new challenges come up, you have new groups join in on it. And I think that's always like a really good indicator of, okay, this is working. People are enjoying this and learning from this. Great. What role does technology play in your programs, and how do you leverage different tools and platforms to enhance learning and mentoring experiences for employees? I know you talked, in a couple of ways about how you're kind of adapting some of these programs with, doing actual practice and doing the simulations and things like that. But could you talk to it a little bit more?
Yeah, I can. And it's still evolving for us because, again, I mentioned at the beginning this devolved function. So different parts of the business are in different places in terms of where technology is supporting them. As an organization, we've definitely started to do that personalization at scale. So we've started to be able to go, depending on your role, depending on what part in the business, you get served up a different version of our learning content. So we've started to do that, which is nice. I talked about that practice in a safe space. So as you say, that simulation and coaching piece that people do. In some parts of our business, and this is quite new, but in some parts of our business, we are starting to use AI capability to help us deliver across different regions and across different markets. And so addressing that language challenge that I spoke about earlier, there is technology now that is enabling us to reach people in a way that we couldn't reach them before because we didn't have that language capability. So that's a relatively small part of our business, but that was shared across our learning function just a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm sure we will start to see that grow more now that, people have seen a use case and they're starting to see that. So certainly we're seeing that as use cases that are happening at the moment. I think as we move into the coming year or so, we will start to see more of that skills piece being driven by technology. So the talent marketplace, the skills identification, the support to identify opportunities for the future. And ideally, we will see more learning in the flow of work. So more of that simulation, but we've got that big technician population. How can we start to use that to help them practice those more technical skills in a safe place? Not something we've got lots of today, but definitely lots of opportunity there. So there's a few ways that we're thinking about that.
That's great. And thinking about just kind of learning and development, in general, what have you seen rapidly evolve over the past 5 years? And what are some key takeaways from that you think are going to stay relevant as we move into the next 5 years?
Yeah, good question. I think, I suppose I've got some lessons learned that kind of link to that. So one of the biggest things that I've learned really is around not jumping on a shiny toy. And that over the past 5 years now, there have been a number of different, this is your go-to, you must do this for learning. And And then, 6 months later, well, no, actually, we don't want to be doing that anymore. Now we want to be doing that. And so I think that's a bit of a lessons learned for me. And I think how that informs now is, so AI is a big deal. And we know it's going to change the way we operate. There is no doubting that. And I think what I've learned from that is, so I go back to my North Star. We need to go back to, it's not about learn AI. It is, right? We need people to learn AI, but that's not the future safe skill. The future safe skill is, I'm technically aware, I'm technically open, I'm ready to learn whatever that new technology might be. Because I don't know how quickly the evolution will come, but once upon a time, the internet was, oh my goodness, this is the next big thing. Nobody even thinks about, do we train people about the internet anymore? And AI will become the same thing. It doesn't mean that we won't still need to be, aware and ready for the next thing. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's kind of, what I think we need to think about is technical capability remains, and what that means changes.
No, absolutely. It's very relevant. And I've heard that referenced as like shiny object syndrome before, right? Where it's like, oh, this new platform, like, is great. It's going to help me do that. And this and of course, there's great salespeople behind all of those platforms. And they're like, you need this, you have to have this to do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, great, great, great. And just like, oh, well, this is going to help me streamline this. So I have to do that. And like, it's very true. And it's very more so than ever in your face, right? Like, where everything seems cool and fun and like, oh, this is going to change everything and this will be great. But that speaks to a lot of actually conversations I've seen people having on LinkedIn about how it's no longer good to be, I don't know, like a specialist in things. It's better to be a generalist, because kind of to the point that you're talking about there, where it's like to have a like core general skill set is so much more adaptable and so much more like future ready for what the next thing is going to be, because there will things. So I really like that. And I think that is really important. And that's like not even in learning and development industry per se. I think that's across all industries.
Right.
I think that's really great. Mel, to close on another kind of fun little lesson learned, what is the most important lesson that you've learned on your journey as a leader that you would pass on to someone just starting out on theirs?
Yeah. Most important. It's a big question, isn't it? I've got a million things to say. So I guess I would sum it up. I think choose your battles is always one of my mantras. So understand exactly, what do you want to, what do you want to go in for, and where is it better not to bother? So choose your battles. Trust your doubters is another thing that I think. So those people who are questioning, there's always an element of truth in whatever it is that they're saying. Their feedback is usually valid. And so whilst they might be difficult conversations, I love those conversations. So like, go there, trust the doubters, lean in, understand what it is that they are trying to tell you. And then I think that probably the other piece is just about knowing who you are and being authentic to that. So, play to your strengths, lean into those, and because that just makes work feel less like work. If you're playing to your strengths, that means, you're going to likely be successful. So they would be my lessons.
Absolutely. I love those, Mel. Those are so great. You have such a wonderful way of, keeping very powerful things succinct. So thank you so much for joining us today on the NovoEDTalks podcast. Your answers were phenomenal, and I know that they're going to resonate with our listeners. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks.